was friends with Vallée, it's probable that they had some working knowledge of each other. No one could argue Hynek and Vallée might have influenced Fowler with their tilt towards the spiritual origin of phenomena, but it's quite evident from Fowler's writings that he's a free thinker and that any determination he has come up with is made by examining all the evidence he found through his own or that was presented to him. Fowler states that he was dismayed by the number of UFO researchers who were coming to the realization that UFOs and aliens are of a spiritual nature. This means that it bothered or annoyed him that his colleagues were coming to conclusions that differed from his conclusions. There is no doubt that this caused him to look into the claims of so many who were changing their minds about the matter. He researched their claims in order to prove them wrong or to prove them right. The result of his further research is that UFOs, aliens, and alien abduction all fall into the category outside of the physical nature. Okay, then we move to another witness, so to speak, Ivor McKay. Now, Captain Ivor McKay is a former chairman of the British UFO Research Association, also known as BUFORA, B-U-F-O-R-A, which was one of Great Britain's largest and most influential UFO groups. Ivar made the following statement in Flying Saucer Review. He said, "Further, if one sets the three occult groups against the three classifications of UFO entities and their characteristics, it is rather surprising how complementary to each other they appear to be, not only through their appearance, activities, and level of behavior, but also in the quality of mental and especially emotional reactions and response that it has been noted to occur on contact." And he said that let's see the name of the book, UFO Entities, Occult and Physical. That was the name of his article. It was in Flying Saucer Review, Volume 16, 1970, numbers 4 and 5. To remain forthright in our research and in our own testimony, we must enter into the record the fact that Ivor McKay is now a devout Christian. One might argue that his name doesn't belong in our list of secular people who have come to the conclusion that aliens are actually spiritual entities. However, the article that, quote, has been taken from was written in 1970, and this has to be noted for the very important reason that in regard to any contention of Mr. McKay's spiritual condition in 1970, it is public knowledge that two of McKay's associates at BUFORA, founding President Graham Newstub, along with Roger Stanway, became born-again Christians at or around 1976. That year, Stanway wrote a letter of resignation telling those at BUFORA that in addition to other things, furthermore, I now believe that UFO phenomena has satanic origins. In addition to the prior mentioned items, another member of BUFORA, researcher, had a conversion to Christianity. The story is best told by David Clark from an article in Fortean Times. Okay. He says, perhaps the most bizarre story of all concerns the BUFORA investigator for South Wales, Randall Jones Pugh, who died in 2003. Pugh was a retired veterinary surgeon who was a God-fearing man who investigated the West Wales UFO flap of 1977 that became known as the Welsh Triangle. Initially, he was another believer in ET visitors, but gradually his views changed. During his investigations, Pugh looked into a range of weird happenings centered upon the remote part of Pembrokeshire coast, lights and objects hovering in the sky, mysterious silver-suited figures peering into farmhouse windows, coward animals, and a herd of cattle teleported from one part of the farm to another, and poltergeists plaguing a family of UFO witnesses. Wow. After a few years, you forget what you wrote. This is interesting. By 1980, he had concluded that the UFO occupants were evil supernatural entities and came to believe ufologists were placing themselves in both physical and spiritual danger. Soon afterwards, like Roger Stanway before him, Pugh left ufology and burned his collection of books and slides. These actions followed a series of personal experiences that he claimed were too frightening to talk about. And let's see, that's Dr. David Clark, Flying Saucers from Hell, in Fortean Times, June of 2006. We feel excuse me, I feel this is important because Ivor McKay was affiliated with these men, and all of them came to faith in Jesus Christ or Yeshua HaMashiach anywhere from 1976 and later. Ivor was most likely in their number during this time. Therefore, his quote about UFO entities being strikingly similar to the three types of occult groups was made by a secular person, which he was, who was researching the spiritual side of UFO enigma, but who most probably hadn't made a decision or made the conversion yet to Christianity. It's interesting that all three persons are listed in the article 14 times as being men who were proponents of the nuts and bolts origin of the UFOs and an extraterrestrial explanation for the abductors, but they were all convinced through their research of all the information, even the spiritual info, that the whole phenomena is a spiritual one that manifests into the physical. Interesting. It only gets better, huh? Okay. Lynn Cato, C-A-T-O-E, this is her testimony for our courtroom. A search for any credentials concerning Lynn Cato was not successful, actually. While I know nothing about her education or her scientific inclinations, I can deduce that she was college educated and that she had a wonderful eye for detail when it came to categorizing and researching. Good education and a sharp eye when it comes to detail are crucial when it comes to any sort of research, and they are credentials that allow Lynn Cato's testimony to be admitted in our courtroom. And here's how important she was, okay? In 1969, Lynn Cato served as a senior bibliographer, of the publication on UFO research by the Library of Congress for the United States Air Force Office of Scientific Research. After a 2-year investigation in which she surveyed thousands of documents, she drew explicit attention to the link between UFOs and the occult. After reading through all the available articles on UFOs, she came up with the following observation, and she says, and I quote, "A large part of the available UFO literature is closely linked with mysticism and the metaphysical. It deals with subjects like mental telepathy, automatic writing, invisible entities, as well as phenomena like poltergeists or ghost manifestations and possession. Many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demonic possession and psychic phenomena." End of quote. Lynn Cato, this is where it comes from. Lynn Cato, UFOs and Related Subjects, an annotated bibliography, 1969, U.S. Government Printing Office, prepared under Air Force Office of Scientific Research, Project Order 67-002 and 68-0003. Lynn is probably the best researcher that there has been in regard to compiling and collating data. Considering the era that her work took place, she, in all probability, worked without the aid of computers. After hours, then days, then weeks, and probably months, she came to the conclusion that with the evidence presented on paper, that beings that purported to be of extraterrestrial origin were really just demons and or angels or fallen angels in disguise. In other words, spiritual entities. Now we go to Dr. Pierre Guérin, G-U-E-R-I-N. He's a French astronomer, or was, if he's still alive, a senior researcher at the French National Council for Scientific Research, the acronym CNRS, has written extensively about the need for scientific research in the UFO field. He died in 2000. Before his death, he wrote a book titled UFOs, The Mechanisms of Disinformation, where he foresaw that the American policy of deep UFO secrecy, which has persisted for many years, will continue because he felt that the general population could not bear a disclosure revelation that there was extraterrestrial life. It is an accepted fact, judging from Guérin's writings, that he was an ardent believer in the theory that UFOs and aliens are of extraterrestrial origin, but his research took him other places, as evidenced by the following statement made by him, and I quote, "UFO behavior is more akin to magic than to physics as we know it. Modern UFOnauts and the demons of past days are probably identical. What is quite certain is that the phenomena is active here on our planet and active here as master." and again, that's Pierre Guérin, in something called 30 Years After Kenneth Arnold, in Flying Saucer Review, Volume 25, Number 1, pages 13 and 14. Dr. Pierre Guérin, astronomer, senior researcher, one who called for more scientific research into the UFO enigma, and an ardent scientist on all accounts, found himself taking beings from whom he thought to be extraterrestrial visitors and comparing their actions with magic and psychic ability, and ultimately admitting that they are probably identical to demons of past days. Hence, they are a spiritual entity that manifests in the physical realm. Okay, now we're starting to see a pattern here, aren't we? I hope so. I have. So far, we've seen several people who have been educated in the sciences who couldn't even mention the things of the spiritual realm, but who have come to the undeniable truth that UFO aliens, abduction, enigma lends itself out to be spiritual experience. The truth, like cream, always tends to work its way to the top. Now we go to the testimony of a man named John Keel. John A. Keel is probably the world's foremost researcher into the paranormal and has traveled extensively to 40 countries investigating the unknown for almost 50 years. 50 years at the time of the writing of this book. Some have gone as far as labeling him the Indiana Jones of the paranormal research world. John has researched the UFO enigma for many years and has come to some startling conclusions. For instance, John Keel observes, after studying literature on demonology, that, and I quote, the manifestations and occurrences described in this imposing literature are similar, if not entirely identical, to UFO phenomena itself. And he said that in UFO's Operation Trojan Horse, 1970, page 21. Folks, I like to cite my sources because I've had my stuff stolen before without citation. And I'm going back to school and they're teaching us about citations. So I think citation's a wonderful thing. If you borrow it from the internet, show where you got it. Okay? If you borrow it from anywhere, show you where you got it. Show them where you got it. Okay, now he goes on to repeat again what he says earlier in the same book. He says, and I quote, the UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations of the age-old demonological phenomena. And again, that was in Operation Trojan Horse, page 299. As is usually the case in any situation where a representative is bringing conflicting reports to an individual or a group, the messenger usually suffers the brunt of the persecution. This is the case many times in the alien abduction scenario. The abductors present to the abductees often with outlandish messages that challenge the concept of normal everyday life. They also offer predictions for future events that do not come true. When this happens, it is usually the messengers or the abductee who is called a liar and a scoundrel. Keel counters this by saying the UFO knots are the liars, not the contactees. And they are lying deliberately as part of the bewildering smokescreen which they have established to cover their real origin, purpose, and motivation. UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse. Okay. In the quote that I just read, Keel further enforces his conclusions that beings that claim to be from other planets in our tangible universe are liars. He's saying that their extraterrestrial mass is just a smokescreen, a delusion, a facade to hide what they really are. He made mention in two previous quotes that he's convinced that the beings are demonic in nature, and here he says that they are deliberately lying through their emissaries who are only innocent pawns in the greater deception. Keel, in his book, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, tells us what originally convinced him to change his opinion as to the origins of the visitors. He says, I abandoned the extraterrestrial hypothesis in 1967 when my own field investigation disclosed an astonishing overlap between psychic phenomena and UFOs. The objects and apparitions do not necessarily originate on another planet and may not even exist in permanent constructions of matter. Ooh, that's important. It is more likely that it is more likely that we see what we want to see and interpret such visions according to our contemporary beliefs.